Bienvenue. Hello and welcome. Welcome to City Breaks Marseille, Episode 8, Food and Shopping. I'm Marion Jones. This episode was always going to be a 1 in 2 halves, but I think as I've completed the notes and thought about it, it's turned out to be a bit more about food than about shopping. Perhaps a 60-40 split, something like that. I didn't get very far into my research on food before I realised how very important the taste of things is to every Marseille citizen. So much so that when the local writer Jean-Claude decided to write a very Marseille-based memoir, he actually called it after 3 of his favourite flavours: garlic, mint and sweet basil. And here, from that book, is an extract on the little chapter devoted to basil, in which he explains how the really very simplest of tastes can leave lasting and wonderful memories. Quote, "I grew up with the smell of basil. Like all children in the south, whenever my mother came back from the market, she always brought 2 or 3 pots of it with her, which she placed on the windowsill in the kitchen. Whenever I can't smell it in my house, I miss it. With the arrival of the first tomato, I need it. A few drops of olive oil on nice red pomodoro, 2 or 3 leaves of basil sprinkled over it, a hunk of leftover bread rubbed in garlic, and your taste buds go dancing. I don't know any simpler happiness." He talks quite a lot in the book about the cuisine of Marseille and how it really rested on using up fish and vegetables that were, as he put it, disdained by better-off people. They might be able to go and buy refined produce like game and poultry and truffles and cheese, but the ordinary Marseille citizens knew how to make the best of really simple and cheap-to-find ingredients, fish and vegetables. In fact, as he says, this was how bouillabaisse was born, from the ugly-looking, inedible, unsellable scorpion fish. And that brings me to one of the 2 ingredients that really typify Marseille and the taste of the city: bouillabaisse and pastis. So where better to start the episode than with those? Today it might be quite upmarket, something you can pay really quite a lot of money for in some of the posher restaurants, but it started life as a very homely dish. Just bits and pieces of fish cooked in olive oil and spices, pepper and saffron, along with some herbs, parsley and bay leaves, and a little orange zest. Result, a warming, spicy, fishy-tasting soup. You might be wondering where its rather strange name comes from. It comes from 2 French verbs: bouillir, the verb to boil, and baisser, the verb to lower or turn down, because that's how you cook it. Once it comes to the boil, quand ça bouille, as the French would have it, then you should baisser le feu, turn the heat down, because it should be simmered long and low, so that all the flavours mingle. I read somewhere that there are 2 rules for cooking a good bouillabaisse. 1, the fish should definitely come from the Mediterranean, and 2, you mustn't put any lobster in it. Traditionally, it was served in 2 parts, so first of all the soup, and secondly the fish, often eaten with a garlic rouille sauce, and or some toasted bread that had been rubbed in garlic. And the second speciality, pastis, an aniseed-flavoured drink, which came about in Marseille in the 1930s from a recipe devised by one Paul Ricard. You'll almost certainly recognise that name because it seems to be on every bottle of pastis that you ever see. The Marseillais call it le petit jaune, the little yellow drink. It began life for medicinal use if you had a stomachache or needed a little help to digest things. But these days it's a typical apéritif. Quite strong though, 45% alcohol, although of course you always drink it diluted with water. And as you mix the 2, it turns cloudy. For some people it's an acquired taste. I've heard it said that you drink the first one because you're thirsty, by the second you're starting to quite like the taste, and by the third you love it. And the other advice that I came across, I also quite liked. You should drink it, it said, frais, so cold, and entre amis, when you're among friends, and avec modération, so moderately, a nod to the fact that it is pretty strong. And best of all, de préférence à Marseille. You should be ideally in Marseille when you drink it. Actually, I would take that further. I would say you should go to the Bar de la Marine, which is a little bar on the Old Port. If you're looking out to sea, it'll be on the left-hand side, about halfway down, perhaps a bit further. because it was famously the haunt of the author Marcel Pagnol, a place where he himself liked to drink, a place he used as a setting for some of his books, and where both he and they liked to knock back a pastis. If you do go there, look out for the photos of him on the walls. Anyway, I had a go at listing all the flavours which I thought of as typically Marseille or Provencal, and I came up with vegetables, all those Mediterranean vegetables, peppers and aubergines and courgettes, and above all tomatoes, as already explained by Jean-Claude Izzo. You definitely have to put fish on the list, all sorts of things from sea bass and mullet to less likely things to an English ear, such as sea urchin and calamari and clams and mussels, and perhaps particularly sardines. You will see fried sardines on lots of menus. You'll see them being sold down at the harbour from little takeaway stalls. There's even a legend that says, "Have you heard the one about the giant sardine which once blocked the Marseille harbour?" Which links back to a story of a ship in the 18th century which sank in the harbour, did indeed block it, and was called La Sartine, so with a T in the middle. So naturally, the wags among the population soon changed that T to a D, and the story of the giant sardine has been told ever since. I think I'd put olives on the list. I was quite astounded when I saw an olive stall in one of the markets. Just olives, the whole thing. Every shade of green you can possibly imagine. Loads of black ones too. Just rows and rows of different varieties. As for herbs, I've already mentioned a trio, basil, mint and garlic, but I'd add parsley and rosemary and sage to the list, as well as aniseed, which I didn't actually know was a herb until I checked. Then lots of spices as well, particularly coriander and cumin and curry flavours generally, because yes, the food very much has foreign influences, as you would expect in a port city, particularly North African influences from the former French colonies, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. So you'll find lots of Moroccan couscous and tagine in the restaurants, along with Tunisian chickpea soup and patisserie served with mint tea. There's a heavy Italian influence too, of course, Italy being so close. Marseille pizza is said to be an absolute speciality, whether from restaurants or takeaways or little pizza trucks. And surprisingly, traditional Marseille pizza is very plain and simple, said to be really two varieties. You can have cheese and tomato, or tomato and anchovy. Or, if you really want to push the boat out, go mi-mi, which really means half and half. So that was my list of things just I spotted when I was out and about, and then I turned to a couple of guidebooks to see what they had to say. One which I got free from the tourist office, called Marseille Essentials, had the following to add. Soupe au pistou, also known apparently as Provence soup, a real taste of summer. So diced vegetables, think courgettes, onions, tomatoes, and beans, possibly haricot beans, kidney beans, maybe green beans, perhaps a mix of the three, all cooked long and slow in olive oil with garlic and tomatoes and basil. It's said that every cook will have their own way of doing it, and there are 1,000 ways to make it. A second soup that was mentioned, said to be a cousin of bouillabaisse, another fish soup called la bourride, bit more refined than bouillabaisse, so made with white fish and a selection of seafood, but once again quite garlicky in flavour. And speaking of garlic, aioli. If you order that from a menu, you'll probably get a meal of cod and potatoes and perhaps green beans, served with a very thick garlicky mayonnaise. They listed a couple of stranger things which I didn't actually see, but I'll mention them anyway. One's called pieds et paquets, which really means feet and packets, and is a very, shall we say, traditional sounding dish of tripe and lamb's feet, all cooked up for 7 or 8 hours in white wine with tomatoes and garlic and parsley. And secondly, something called poutargue, little pieces of tuna or mullet preserved in salt. And then a couple of sort of sauce accompaniment type things, which I did see. The, I can't pronounce it, speciality l'anchoade, or something like that, also known apparently as fondue provençal, which is very Mediterranean, olives and anchovies, capers, olive oil and garlic. And a second spicy little sauce called tapenade, which would be olives, capers and pine nuts, in the original green variety, or possibly if you had anchovies, would then be the black variety. As for sweet treats, the top one is navette, little biscuits made to a recipe that's several hundred years old, and a very jealously guarded secret. They're quite crunchy little biscuits flavoured with orange blossom. They are boat-shaped. Some people say because that's in memory of the boats which brought the saints to Marseille, and other people say no, it's just in memory of the fact that the huge port city of Marseille started life as a fishing village. Look out too for les Marseillottes, which is a little nugget-type sweet covered in chocolate. There are specialities from a little bit further away, so you can buy the calissons that come from Aix-en-Provence. They're little marzipan sweets. And there's quite a taste for Turkish delight too, which is known in Marseille as lokoumi. There's a sweet speciality from L'Estaque, fishing village up the coast that's practically part of Marseille these days. They're called chichi, a sweet fried cake, think donut really, but not round, long, and dusted with icing sugar and served in little bits of paper as a takeaway snack. I came across a couple of seasonal specialities too, one of which is called la pompe à l'huile, which is an odd name for a cake because it means oil pump, but anyway, it's a little pastry with an orange flavour. That's served specifically for Christmas, often as part of the Provencal tradition of the 13 desserts. So that will be one, and alongside it there'll be various fruits and dried fruits, and perhaps some nougat or nugget if you pronounce it like that. And secondly, a speciality for Whitsun, something called a colombier, a little cake made of ground almonds and egg white, in which will be hidden a bean. And when the cake is sliced up, the question is always who's going to get the bean, and if it's you, that is an indication that you will be getting married before the year is out. Next on my quest for information about Marseille's culinary traditions, I looked to literature, and in a couple of the books that I read, I found some interesting descriptions of restaurant meals. So from the Marseille Caper, for example, written by Peter Mayle, came this description of two characters having lunch. Actually, they were in Cassis, just up the coast, not in Marseille. Quote, "They had soupe de poisson, the formidable Provençal fish soup, laced with rouille, a thick garlic-loaded sauce. They had perfectly grilled scorpion fish, and they had a bottled rosé from the Domaine du Paternel." And a second meal, described later in the novel, went like this. The dish of the day arrived in all its dusty glory, with thin slices of inkfish resting on a bed of glistening black angel's hair pasta. To one side, for a change of texture and to provide what Philippe called an epiphany for the palate, there was a creamy sauce of goat's cheese. And here's a simple meal from a different novel, Total Chaos, by Jean-Claude Izzo. Quote, "Mozzarella and tomatoes, with capers, anchovies and black olives for starters. Spaghetti with clams as a main dish, tiramisu for dessert, and to drink a bandol from the Puy-Barnon vineyards." I was intrigued by that last bit, so I looked up Puy-Barnon vineyards and found that they overlook the Mediterranean. Think hillsides lined with olive trees and cypresses and oleanders. Imagine a winding road leading up through the pine forests to a chateau, some 300 metres above sea level, and there you'll find vines in tight rows, as it's described on the website, quote, "in the shape of a semicircle, like a masterful Greek amphitheatre." And because the hillside is steep, the vines have been planted on something called restanques, which are terraces cut out from the hillside many generations ago. Anyway, back to my meals from literature. I also came across a couple eating an appetizer of slices of bread dipped in anchovy puree, well seasoned with pepper and chopped garlic. Then there was soup made from sea urchin flesh, seasoned with saffron. There was something called bresaola, which is air-dried salted beef, which on this occasion was served in thin slices with artichoke hearts, sun-dried tomatoes and parmesan. Somebody had beef cheeks with a slice of foie gras on top. Someone else had fried cuttlefish and aubergine, all cooked in cheese. And there were descriptions of ravioli and olive puree, of calamari and parsley, and of peppers stuffed with rice and sausage meat, all cooked in a tomato sauce. There are many food memories all through Jean-Claude Izzo's memoir, Garlic, Mint and Sweet Basil, mention of cutting up eggplant and zucchini with his mum in the kitchen, green, red and yellow peppers, gutting fish, washing octopus and squid, cutting up rabbit, marinating red meat, preparing sea bream in fennel, or ratatouille, or paella, braised artichokes in white wine broth, cod in tomato and red wine sauce. And in his detective novels, one of the characters will sometimes describe exactly what they're cooking, and the way it's written, you just know that Jean-Claude himself must have been quite handy in the kitchen. Here's an example. Quote, "After washing the bass, I'd filled it with fennel, then drizzled oil over it. Then I made the sauce. The rest of the fennel had simmered gently in salt water with a touch of butter. In a well-oiled pan, I gently fried slices of onion and garlic and finely chopped peppers. A spoonful of vinegar soup, then I added tomatoes that I'd cut into little cubes and plunged in boiling water. When the water evaporated, I added the fennel." You could follow that as a recipe. And again, it gives those same ingredients which keep turning up and are the flavours of Marseille. As for the restaurants, I decided against recommending specific ones. You're surely going to want to wander and see what you can find, but I thought I might mention just a couple of areas of the city where there are plenty to choose from. Whether your visit to Marseille is long or short, you will surely spend at least one evening wandering around the Vieux-Port area, the harbour area, and just looking to see what's on offer. And what stands out particularly is, yes, you've guessed it, lots and lots and lots of different forms of fish and seafood. I saw a board offering huîtres de Camargue, so oysters from the Camargue, with a glass of wine. 3 different formules, so 3 different set menus, where you could have 6 or 12 or 24 oysters. A number of times I saw scrawled on a blackboard outside, "Arrivage journalier," which means daily arrivals and is telling you that the fish will be very freshly caught, that very day in fact. And aside from the harbour, the other area I'd recommend is the Cours Julien, which is a square that you can reach in about a 10-minute walk from the old harbour. Just go straight up the Canebière, keeping an eye on your map, and you'll be there in 10 minutes or so. It's off to the right-hand side. It's quite the hipster area, lots of graffiti, lots of arty shops, and definitely lots and lots of restaurants of every type of ethnicity. I've seen it variously described as Marseille's trendiest neighbourhood, or as a quartier nocturne, so a place for the evening. It is definitely lively. It had maybe a slight air of keep an eye on your handbag. I don't think I'd venture there by myself in the evening, but it's the sort of place that would be fun in a group. And a third area, just to mention quickly, La Joliette. That area reached by walking down the old port off to the right and along the coast, past the 2 big museums I talked about in a previous episode, the Musée and the Cosquet Caves Museum, 2 various areas designed for you to spend your leisure hours shopping, eating, hanging out. So that makes this a good moment to move to the other topic of the podcast, namely shopping. And I thought I'd start by mentioning 3 items which I know are very popular to take home from Marseille as souvenirs. And then when I've done that, I'm going to go through various areas of the city which are popular for shopping and give an idea of the differences between them. So, the 3 souvenirs. You may well want to buy some Savon de Marseille, Marseille soap, because soap has been made in Marseille for centuries. It was very popular until the 20th century when detergents and chemicals took over, but until then, proper Marseille soap made with olive oil and not much else, no colour or perfume, was very much a thing. There are still several traditional soap factories in the city, as well as a good number of shops that will sell you Marseille soap, which these days has moved on a bit and comes in lots of different colours and perfumes. Traditional ones like rose and lavender and whatnot, and more unusual ones, for example, aniseed. Secondly, you may fancy taking home some navette, those traditional little boat-shaped biscuits. And thirdly, something very Provençal, namely Santons, as they're called in English, or Santons, which are little clay figures originally made to display as a nativity scene at Christmas, popular all over Provence in churches and in homes, and which gradually sort of grew in the telling, as in more and more different characters were produced. So they began, obviously, with Mary and Joseph, the baby, the shepherds, the kings. These days, you can find every character who may have ever populated a Provençal village. Think millers, shopkeepers, teachers, children, etc., etc. It's really a big thing in the area, and in fact, if you go to nearby Aubagne, which is a short train ride away, and which I'll be talking about in another episode to come, in fact, you will find an institution called the Village des Santons en Provence, so the Provence's Santon village, which is really a museum or a big display area where craftsmen from 15 or 20 different companies all display their wares, and they all vie with each other to set up the most amazing scenes. So as you go round, you'll find village scenes, Provençal hills or maybe the Calanque, and dozens, sometimes hundreds of little characters working in the fields, serving in the shops, at leisure, maybe dancing or playing cards or pétanque. Some will be fishing, some will be cooking. They're really very charming. And there's a separate room for all the nativity scenes, as made by each particular company. The day I went, the very nice lady in charge was telling me that Provençal families often have a set of Santons which have been passed down from one generation to the next, which certainly come out every Christmas, but which actually in lots of houses are on display all year round. And as the years go by, people buy new ones to add to the set. So, moving on then to the various areas of Marseille where you might wish to go shopping, definitely want to mention the markets, which are all over the city. The largest one is quite easy to find. It's the Marché de Noailles, which is just a few minutes' walk up the Canebière, off on the right. You'll find it easily on a map, and when you get there, you will be struck, I think, by the noise and the colour and the amount of produce piled up. There are whole stalls of the fruits and vegetables you'd expect, but also of spices. I spotted a halal butcher's. There were lots of cafes. Definitely a place to pop into. Although, unless you're self-catering, you probably won't buy all that much there. Provisions for a picnic, perhaps? But as for shopping proper, I've picked out 4 areas which I think are worth a wander. The first one is the Old Harbour, which actually has more restaurants than shops, but where you can find 2 or 3 quite particular places. So there's the fish market on the harbour itself, where even if you don't want raw fish to take home and cook, you can still buy a nice sardine snack that will be cooked in front of you while you wait. On the Quai de Rive-Neuve, which is the left-hand side if you're looking out to sea, you will find a soap shop, which is also a museum. It's got a very long title. It's called the Musée du Savon, so Soap Museum, de Marseille, La Licorne, a licorne being a unicorn. Not quite sure how that fits, but anyway, it's a museum, so you can learn a little bit about the soap industry. It's a workshop, so you can actually make some soap to take away. And of course, they will sell you some. And on the board outside, it has wording, guaranteed 72% oil. And on the opposite side of the harbour, the part called the Quai du Port, you will find at number 96 one of the Santons shops called Escoffier. You need to remember the number because it's quite hidden. There are lots of restaurant terraces there, and you need to look behind those to find it. But once you do find it, you'll find a little haven of all sorts of Santons. You can spend a happy hour choosing which ones you'd like for your nativity scene or your souvenir of Provence display. And if when you get home you wish you'd bought more, be pleased to know that they do a mail order service. A second place it's worth having a look is the Canebière, so that main street leading back from the harbour, where among all the relatively ordinary shops and restaurants and whatnot, you'll find several shops where you can buy some particularly Marseille-type items. At number 19, for example, is La Gourmande, so that's the shop for the navette, the little biscuits, and all sorts of other sweet treats too. Almost as soon as you walk in, they'll offer you a free sample, and then there's lots and lots to browse. You can buy ready-made selections, and you can also have your own selection made up. Choose all the different flavours that you fancy. At number 44, La Canebière, you will find the official Olympique de Marseille shop, so the place for football fans to buy the mugs and t-shirts and posters and key rings and everything else to do with Olympique de Marseille, the football team in the city. There are a couple of soap shops here too, and up at number 56, look out for Torrefaction Noailles, which is a coffee and sweets shop. I did read somewhere that the first coffee ever served in France was served in Marseille in, I think it was 1654. I think I may have read similar about one or two other places in France, so I'm not sure if it's true. But I can believe that it might be because of being a port city. This new strange drink from the East may well have found its way here. Anyway, if you want to browse a good selection of proper coffees to drink or to buy in packets and take home, then Torrefaction de Noailles is a good place, and it's also really good for chocolates and sweets. Proper, classy, nice-looking ones. It's mentioned in the guidebook, so you will find some tourists there, but actually it was very much a local place too. Somewhere to meet your friends or hide away with a novel and have a quiet hour. And a really nice atmosphere. I recommend. Thirdly, shopping-wise, don't miss the Le Panier district, which had an episode to itself, but just as a reminder, it's an arty district where you'll find shops run by local artists and seamstresses, and you can buy clothing and art and leather goods, jewellery, pottery. Some of the shops are workshops too, so you can browse and watch people creating the goods they sell. I found a couple of good websites about the restaurants and the shops in Le Panier, and I'll put the links to those in the show notes. But one place I wanted to mention specifically is somewhere called La Maison de la Boule. Boule being that bowling game played with metal balls that you see all over France, particularly in the south. It's in one of the little squares, Place des 13 Cantons, in fact. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes, but it's definitely worth a look. It is quite an institution. Signs outside very keen to tell you that this is the oldest boule shop in Marseille, run by the company making the oldest boule in the whole world, currently run by the fourth generation of the family, and you can find in there all things to do with boule, or pétanque as it's also called. There are photographs and sets of rules and that sort of thing to look at on the walls. There's a mini bowling area in the shop itself, so you can have a go or watch other people who know what they're doing have a go. And you can buy all sorts of things to do with the game, the boule itself, the gloves you might need. I had a very earnest conversation between the shopkeeper and a couple of customers about exactly which weight of boule would be best for the games they had in mind. It's just a good place to feel that you're having a little look at Marseille culture. And the fourth area I wanted to mention is La Joliette, so that bit that you get to if you walk down the harbour on the right-hand side, round the corner, past the big museums, the Musée and the Cosquet, and come to the leisure and shopping area that was designed in the late 1990s in what used to be former docklands and warehouses. So if you walk down there, you will pass Les Voûtes, or the arcades in English, where little shops and restaurants and bars are being created along the old quays. Then you'll come to Les Docks, which is an old warehouse complex, I think 4 warehouses in a row, which have all been transformed into a sort of shopping, restaurant, business area. Very light and airy, think modern art, plants, and concept stores. And the one I particularly wanted to mention is called MX Marseille, run by Ricard, so the people who make the pastis, and a fascinating place because it's a museum where you can learn how pastis is made and get ideas for how to use aniseed in cooking and all sorts of other things. And it's a shop, so you can buy all these things. It's got a bar and a restaurant attached. And it's all very modern and jaunty. So the bar, for example, is completely done in bright yellow tables and chairs, the only bright yellow babyfoot table I've ever seen. And the restaurant is all done out in an equally vibrant green. The menu makes it clear that many of the signature dishes revolve around the aniseed flavour. It's all very trendy, somehow very French, and yes, also very Marseille, revolving as it does exclusively around one of Marseille's most famous products. And then finally, also down in that area, Les Terrasses du Port, a massive shopping and leisure and eating centre, with at least 20 different restaurants and cafes to choose from, and a wonderful rooftop terrace. So if you want a drink or a meal or a cocktail with a view, that's your place. And by the way, the restaurants and bars are open every day until 1 a.m. All 4 of those areas, the Port, the Canebière, Le Panier and La Joliette, are very central, and between them then they offer lots of options for all the shopping you could possibly want to do, plus of course quite a bit of the eating as well. And that more or less wraps up today's episode, and means in fact that we're nearing the end of the Marseille series. Just 2 episodes to go, both of which have a literary flavour. The last one will be an anthology, and next time round I'm going to concentrate on one author with a very close connection to Marseille, namely Marcel Pagnol. I'll cover his life in Marseille and in Provence, mention the idea of a day trip to Aubagne, where he was born, which is only half an hour or so away by train, and where you can visit his birthplace. And then have a little look at some of the books that he wrote, which all have things to say about the area. So that would include the 2 volumes of his childhood memoir, My Father's Glory and My Mother's Castle, as well as a trilogy of plays which were set in Marseille, mainly around the old harbour, and the 2 dramatic novels set in Provence, Jean de Florette and Manon des Sources. I hope very much that you'll be able to listen in for that, but for now, just to sign off from the topics of Marseille's food and shopping, with a reminder that a summary of everything I've said, along with lots of links and photographs, will be available as soon as the podcast comes out on the website www.citybreaks.co.uk, where, in addition to keeping up with the Marseille episodes, you could have a browse at some of the other cities I've covered. Think London, Florence, Edinburgh, and lots of other goodies too. For now, though, just thank you very much for listening. Merci pour l'écoute, and goodbye until next time. Au revoir.